So the New York Islanders have asked for permission to speak with the Maple Leafs president of hockey operations, Brendan Shanahan. There is currently no word on what MLSE's response. A decision on his future could come at Thursday's board meeting. If the Leafs, choose to part ways, they are expected to move forward without a team president for now. So that's coming from Chris Johnson and Pierre LeBrun. And I was also going to say that this also came out that Seattle continues to work through the process of hiring a head coach. This is from Darren Traeger. Toronto has granted Kraken permission to speak with Lane Lambert, assistant coach. So Toronto's granting permission left and right here. Pretty crazy, but kind of the conversation of just different changes happening in Toronto. I don't think Lane Lambert was necessarily like an issue. He was obviously the guy that focused on the defensive side of things, but that kind of garners the interest of another team, and that's kind of what happened here. So could be a lot of changes again for the Leafs in terms of management and peripheral, maybe some assistant coaches, but we'll see what happens. Just to kind of go back to my conversation, though, here. I think my perspective on this in a lot of ways is two things. I think Brendan Shanahan is a respected executive, a former NHL player across the league. I think for a lot of people, regardless of how you feel about how he's done with the Toronto Maple Leafs, that is the honest truth. That's where it stands. He's been in the industry for a long time. He demanded respect within MLSE and the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. And when you look at his resume, he also has a past and potentially a future within the National Hockey League at the NHL league level. So I'm dropping some tidbits here, guys, but I have multiple sources that have told me that Brendan Shanahan will have a role in this sport and in this league moving forward. If it's not with the New York Islanders, I've even heard that maybe he has a role again with the National Hockey League up high. If you look at Brendan Shanahan's history, he was the vice president of player safety at one point. He had involvement in the player safety process. We know how difficult that process has been under George Peros. I think it's gone a little sideways, but at the same time, we've had issues with other guys at the helm in the past. So I think at the league level, we'll see if they make some big personnel changes. But for a lot of teams that are in search of a general manager and president, Brendan Shanahan's in that conversation. But he's not going to take a demotion. He's not going to take a role lesser of what he had with one of the biggest organizations in the National Hockey League, and that being the Toronto Maple Leafs. So my pushback on that will be if the New York Islanders can offer him the sun, the moon, the stars, maybe he looks at the job for the New York Islanders. But you have to understand, Lou Lamoriello reported to Brendan Shanahan in Toronto. So he'll need at least everything Lou Lamoriello had on Long Island plus to maybe even consider that role. I think there's other teams that are, I'm sure, going to reach out. We're not even 100% that Brendan Shanahan's going to be gone from Toronto, but as you're watching this, maybe you're watching on the replay, you're watching a few days later, it's possible, and I hear it's very possible that coming out of this board meeting, they are just going to move on. But the decision has to be made now. You can't wait until his contract expires June 30th because so much will have happened and so much will be needing to happen, like decisions, the draft, free agency. There's this guy named Mitch Marner who is going to be a UFA. There's this guy named John Tavares who's going to be a UFA. So I think that's the perspective for this whole situation right now. The Florida Panthers defeat the Toronto Maple Leafs in 7 games. It was right down to that series, I would say, decision-making game, and the Leafs went 2 home games to close out their year with no-show performances. So that reflects up high. That reflects on the I would say the team member, the guy at the top, who basically made these decisions going back the last decade. And that is Brendan Shanahan, who decided to stick with the core 4, who decided to stick with a lot of the structure around this team. It didn't happen until recently where he obviously brought Brad Treliving in, brought Craig Berube in to try to bring a new identity on this team, but maybe a little too late for Brendan Shanahan. So we'll see how it all goes down, but that's the news kind of coming out as of today, Wednesday, and then tomorrow, Thursday, for that board meeting that will take place. And we're likely going to learn a lot more by the end of this week. And here we go. Another breaking news here. This is what I was waiting for. So right from Sportsnet, we'll bring this up here. Wow. Here we go. This is the best part about doing BR NHL Daily. You get some breaking news and you get to break it live on the show. So it seems that with the request of the New York Islanders trying to speak to Brendan Shanahan, the permission has been granted. Here we go. So Maple Leafs grant Islanders permission to speak to Brendan Shanahan. So that's before the board meeting even happens. The New York Islanders have been granted permission to speak to Toronto Maple Leafs president Brendan Shanahan about their opening in the front office. Shanahan, whose contract expires on June 30th, has been president of the Leafs since April 2014. So over a decade, as we discussed. So Chris Johnson was the first to report the Islanders asked, as we already went over. And since the Islanders are rebuilding their front office this summer after parting ways with former president and general manager Lou Lamoriello, he previously worked with Shanahan in Toronto. Elliot Friedman reported Wednesday that Mark Bergevin and Matthew Darche will each be getting a second interview for the Islanders general manager job, and that Jarmo Kekalainen is also considered a candidate. So those are the candidates for the GM job. While, as I said, I think there's a real conversation that Brendan Shanahan would be the boss of whoever those guys they bring in. I think that's the structure that makes the most sense. Sometimes it's not a great thing to have too many hockey minds and too many former players kind of in the same room. Sometimes it can cause too much debate, too much turmoil, too much disagreeing. But I think in this scenario where maybe you have more of the creative mindset, maybe Brendan Shanahan is the business guy up top as the former player as well. We'll see. I just, for me, in my head, I'm thinking Mark Bergevin, he might be too big of a head for Brendan Shanahan in terms of that debate, in terms of those aggressive moves. But we'll see. I mean, once the guy in Montreal, Mark Bergevin, and then the guy in Toronto uniting on Long Island, that'd be kind of funny. But I think Matthew Darche maybe makes more sense for that dynamic. Jarmo Kekalainen, we know he did some good stuff in Columbus. We'll see. But yeah, just some more information. Of course, the MLSE board, I was kind of hearing some rumblings. It is going to be a meeting that takes place on Thursday, which is tomorrow as I record. And then we will see if those conversations today with Brendan Shanahan and the New York Islanders maybe lead into a contract offer. And then that would be something brought up at the board meeting as well in consideration, going, hey, are we ready to move on from this guy? Is he going to be with the New York Islanders, or is he going to be in another role around the National Hockey League? I think that's yet to be seen. I don't think the Islanders are the only party that have interest in Brendan Shanahan. As I said, it could be at the team level. It could be at the league level. We're going to keep an eye on that.